predators, virtual worlds offer anonymity and a lack of accountability for behaviors that target children. As the metaverse aims to bring us closer together through fully immersive experiences, children's long-term cognitive, emotional, physical, and social risks must be better understood. Today's panel brings together multidisciplinary expertise to expose the underbelly of the metaverse. Moderating this panel is my friend Kavya Perlman, the visionary behind the Metaverse Safety Week, also known as the Cyber Guardian. She's the founder and CEO of XRSI. Kavya has built and contributed to several standards and laws for the emerging technology domain. She has won several awards for her work and has been named one of the top 20 cybersecurity influencers for 3 consecutive years, for 2018, 19, and 20, and again for the year 22 by IFSec Global. We're joined today by John. With subject matter experts partnering with global stakeholders to support 1, effective justice systems responses in source and demand side countries, and 2, technology and financial sector improvements to detect and report live stream child sexual exploitation, all resulting in sustainable protection for children and accountability for perpetrators. In 2022, John published a blog, Lessons from Lockdown, Protecting Children from Live Stream Sexual Exploitation in a Post-Pandemic World, in Slave Free Today by the Journal of Modern Slavery. We're also joined by Justin Brookman. Justin is the Director of Technology. Privacy, data security, and technology law and policy. Before joining CR, Brookman was Policy Director of the Federal Trade Commission's Office of Technology Research and Investigation. At the FTC, Brookman conducted and published original research on consumer protection concerns raised by emerging technology such as cross-device tracking, smartphone security, and the Internet of Things. Dan leads Public's privacy, security, and online safety domain. 8+ years in digital transformation and strategy consulting, Dan's subject matter expertise is focused on tech policy interventions to prepare for online safety regulation and grow a responsible digital economy. We'll be speaking with Dan about all things child safety and the metaverse on this panel. We look forward to hearing what you all have to say. Kavya, please take it away.
Thank you, Laura, for this amazing introduction. And I am so sorry that we are still trying to get Dan on the stage, but in the meantime, I'm going to start the discussion. First of all, thank you, John and Justin, for making the effort to making this thing possible, stepping into all space VR with your avatars and taking on the stage to share your amazing insights with us. Thanks everyone who is here in board with us and who is watching via either AWE.live or our YouTube channel. So I really appreciate you sticking around because we have lots to share with you. As the metaverse arms to bring us closer together through fully immersive experiences, children's long-term cognitive, emotional, physical, and social risks must be better understood. We're digging deeper into these issues and exposing the underbelly of the metaverse. I'm honored to have these amazing experts with me today, and these experts they have been in the industry for quite some time. So I don't want to waste any more time. Let me go over to you, John. If you want to highlight some of the work and how that potentially relates to the metaverse and why is this?
Thank you, Kavya, for that introduction, and thank you for this invitation to Metaverse Safety Week. My name is John Sonego, and I work with International Justice Mission. We're a global nonprofit organization working to protect people from different forms of violence and abuse by strengthening justice systems. A lot of what we do it in partnership and collaboration with the private sector, such as technology companies and financial sector companies. So I lived in the Philippines for my first 7 years with IJM, and I worked alongside our team in the Philippines and the Philippine government to protect children from online sexual exploitation and abuse. In particular, the live streaming of child sexual abuse that happens in video calls around the world. And so I think as I approach this question of safety in the metaverse, I'm really approaching it from the perspective of safety by design. What we have seen in the Philippines is that the platforms that are being used to abuse children, to create new child sexual abuse materials, are very popular, common, everyday video chat platforms that all of us use to communicate with family or to do work communications and video calls. And yet, this very popular and common technology is being weaponized and exploited to harm children. And I say I approach that from a safety by design perspective because what we've seen in the Philippines is we've been partnering with the government and foreign law enforcement to strengthen the capacity of the justice system. And I can absolutely say it's night and day now from when it was 7 or 8 years ago. Philippine law enforcement actually recently reached a milestone where they rescued, safeguarded over 1,000 victims of online sexual exploitation of children. But what we're seeing is that on the online platform side, the abuse is still happening and it's not being detected, it's not being reported, it's not being disrupted. And so that's where I get to safety by design, because even if you strengthen law enforcement capacity around the world, if the abuse is happening in hidden spaces, in places where it's actually difficult to detect the abuse, then you really need a safety by design approach where that harm is being prevented in the first place by good technology, by good moderation, by smart rules and tools by these platforms. And so I think as you look at the metaverse, you really have to think about safety by design at the start to protect children from all different kinds of online exploitation and abuse. Thank you, Kavya.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more with safety by design, John. And thank you so much for doing the work that you do. One of the reasons why I'm shying away from children's safety every time I into it, it has such a deeper impact on my own psyche. So, salute to you, applauds to you for just doing remarkable work that is difficult times. So let me see if you're able to unmute and same question for you. If anything that you want to highlight from your work, and why is this important to you?
Yeah, thanks, Kavya, and thanks so much for having me. My name's Dan Fitter. I lead Public's work in privacy, security, and online safety. Public are a government technology company focused on the public sector and digital transformation. My team have been working extensively on issues around online safety and the safety technology sector, as well as sort of age assurance and safety by design across a range of different platform types, dating, gaming, and social media, and otherwise. We're based in London, but work across Europe. And so I come at this really from a public sector perspective, thinking about sort of policy and regulatory interventions, how they work, and obviously in the context of changing legislation, particularly sort of the Online Safety Bill in the UK, the Digital Services Act in the EU, and a range of other kind of work around age-appropriate design. I think I'd probably kind of flag a few key points. I think firstly, just building on what John said, obviously child safety in the metaverse is a particular kind of focus of this kind of discussion, because children are most likely to engage on metaversal platforms. We know that something like 83% of monthly active users in the metaverse are under 18, and the majority of them are actually even under 13. That's based on some research done recently from Metaverse, I believe. In any case, there are a few kind of challenges for interactions in the metaverse, and particularly for children and their experiences, that make it different from engaging on traditional platforms. Firstly, obviously, everything is real time, it's ephemeral. That means everything is live streamed, and so it's much harder to do post hoc moderation. Secondly, it's lifelike. Some recent research from Kennedy School studied how the brain reacts in the metaverse in a very similar way to in real life. And obviously that leads to greater risk of trauma and a psychological impact. It's immersive, so obviously stimulating the sense of being there, and then risks around anonymity as well. So kind of children's interaction with strangers may be harder to monitor. Obviously, that is also the case in some traditional social media and other platforms. So that's kind of coming at this, and really excited to have this conversation, looking at sort of privacy and safety by design. So I'll pause there for a moment and hand over back to Tavia.
Sure. Thank you, Dan, and it's helpful that you're joining us to help us out understand these rights. Let me go over to Justin. Justin, when you're not talking, stay mute, but for now, please unmute yourself, and if you want to highlight any of the aspects of your work, as well as why is Justin. You're just try one more time. Yeah. So yeah, in the interest of time, John, let's wait until we get Justin's audio back. But what are the threats and challenges in the metaverse when it comes to children? What are the things that you actually highlight, or maybe even similar? What are the threats and challenges sober?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges for child safety in the metaverse is really going to be, how do you take the technology and the child safety tools from traditional online spaces, like social media platforms, video chat platforms. How do you take those and implement them in the metaverse? For example, how do you scan and detect for child sexual abuse or exploitation, grooming, sextortion? How do you actually moderate in what is essentially a live stream ephemeral context? So I think it's really, the onus is really on the companies that are building these metaverse spaces to collaborate very closely with safety tech industry, safety tech companies, and the child protection sector, NGOs, CSOs, other child protection specialists, and even survivors of different forms of online abuse and exploitation. Sit down and have the conversations about what are the risks in these spaces, and what's working, what's not working. So I'm aware of a report that was published by, I believe it was the Bracket Foundation, I think maybe in collaboration with We Protect Global Alliance, that looked at some of the harm that's happening within the metaverse as it relates to gaming. So I think clearly, you have to ask the question about how can you anticipate how offenders and criminals will exploit the metaverse to harm children, but you have to expect that will happen, and then build in safety into the design of it. And then you also have to ask the question, how will companies report suspected exploitation and abuse that's happening in the metaverse? For example, will they report it to the to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's cyber tip line report. I think it's important for companies to register with NCMEC if they're operating in the metaverse in anticipation that they may come across child exploitation or child abuse, and that they should actually have a reporting hotline that they're going to report that to. So I think it's really just kind of anticipating and getting in the right conversations with people. I think companies that are forming spaces in the metaverse might consider joining the Technology Coalition, which is a group of some of the leading multinational companies, including, of course, Meta, who are working together to eradicate online sexual exploitation and abuse of children. I think the Technology Coalition is doing a lot of good work. So I would say, it's really incumbent on these companies to get ahead of it, part of the right coalitions, and start to have these conversations.
And John, before I ask Dan to jump in, let me quickly check Justin. Let's see if we are able to hear you. And you're welcome to come right next to you. Unmute yourself. We're able to hear you. Good. Okay, I think that's not working. Justin, still.
Sorry, Kavi, are you talking to me? It's Dan actually, not Justin. But yeah, I can.
Yes, Justin,
what was your question?
Yeah, so Dan, especially what is so unique about these challenges than the traditional internet, and what do we need to be concerned about? The meantime, just you could a sound check with Ariane. That would be great because we can't hear you.
Okay, you're breaking in and out a little bit, so apologies if I didn't fully get all of the question. I think sort of what makes some of these challenges unique. I've spoken to it, but I think it's fair to say that sort of a lot of the, as John said, a lot of the harms that currently exist in traditional platforms, we can assume are already existing on sort of metaversal experiences. For example, Fortnite, Roblox, Minecraft, particularly in online gaming, which has obviously been an early adopter of immersive characteristics in user experiences, but also obviously in sort of Horizon Worlds and other platforms. What Public actually have done with DCMS, the Digital Ministry in the UK, as part of an online safety data initiative, OSTI, last year, we actually worked with industry and with the safety tech sector and with civil society and academics to build a common taxonomy of online harms. And out of that, we obviously sort of mapped something like 18 different harm types across sort of legal harms such as child sexual abuse and exploitation and terrorism, but also things like legal but harmful, so abuse, harassment, hate speech, and other challenges. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of those harms, which we've seen in detail, traditional platforms, are still there, but sort of express themselves in different and new ways. And so I think one of the key elements as we begin to mature sort of metaverse technologies is really understanding what are the new vectors for harm, what are the new intersectionalities between online harms and how they work themselves out in the metaverse. Obviously, I think, as I said, because of the demographics of metaverse platforms right now, it's really important that we begin with child safety, and obviously as a legal under the online safety bill as it's progressing and other sort of international legislation, that's where we want to start. Does that answer your question?
For sure. And so, yeah, certainly. And it actually dives a little bit deeper into what I was going to ask you next. So what are the potential solutions? So it's certainly, we need more regulation. John, in your view, do you have any potential solution? You talked about all these online child sexual exploitation being live streamed. In fact, I can tell you with my personal experience back at Linden Lab when I was the head of security for Second Life, these things are far too common, and there is more to it actually if you peel sort of a layer of onion. there's more taxonomy like age play, predators pretending to be children, and vice versa. This is another kind of a threat that is highlighted. So, yeah, John, what are the other taxonomy potentially we should be aware of in solutions that you have for us?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think in terms of solutions, look, when you're talking about these harms, the majority of them are going to be some type of illegal, crime, child sexual abuse or exploitation, harassment, whatever it might be, grooming. And so I think, you look at the way we organize our societies, and governments have the primary responsibility to protect people from violence and abuse. And so what you need to see is government stepping up and passing laws, passing legislation that sets standards for what happens online, that sets standards for child safety and protection. And those standards should be across the board, whether you're going into a video call, or you're on social media, or you're live streaming on a platform, or you're going into the metaverse. There should be a common standard across the board that companies, private companies, who are creating these spaces and opening them up to billions of people around the world, that they need to make these spaces safe. They need to have prevention technology built in. They need to have things like age verification built in, because we know that that's how we keep children safe in the real physical world. Nobody would drop off their kids at a playground that was, where you had adults and people of all ages just running around playing. You drop your kids off at a playground and they're playing with other kids. And so I think really at the end of the day, you need governments to step up and create a level playing field across industry. Because you could say, oh, let's leave it up to industry, but then what you'll have technology companies, and maybe some who are creating metaverse spaces, do the right thing and make their platform safe by design and detect and report harm. But then you'll have others who don't, and those will become more dangerous spaces. And so I think we don't need to make the same mistakes again that we've already made with the current technology landscape of just basic social media platforms and live streaming applications. You really need to see government step up and create online safety regulation that applies across the board, because ultimately government has the primary responsibility to keep citizens and people safe. Certainly companies have an ethical responsibility to do that, and they should do that. I would say they also have an economic responsibility, because platforms that are not safe, eventually, nobody's going to want to go and use that platform. But ultimately, it's got to be government that steps up and I think leads the way in setting those safety standards.
And anything on that solution? Thank you, John.
Yeah, I think I'm not necessarily sure that it's necessarily government that has to drive the standards, but I think clear legislation is obviously the starting point that looks at kind of system level impact, ideally isn't sort of too tied to a single sort of technology or set of technologies, so that sort of legislation is scalable and it's clear for as sort of Web3 develops and as metaverse platforms mature. What we're seeing is that sort of there are a number of, in age assurance, for example, there are a number of different bodies that are developing standards somewhat in parallel. You've got the ICO, you've got sort of in the UK, the AVPA, the Age Verification Providers Association, and sort of other organizations that are to some extent collaborating, but also we have a common set of standards. I'm just not sure whether it's sort of up to a single government. Actually, really is more in public's view, probably engaging the entirety of the ecosystem, trying to understand from sort of academia and civil society where a lot of the capability and understanding of the risks and harms lie, but also engaging with sort of the tech sector, the safety tech sector that is working on sort of tackling harmful content, conduct, and contact. And then standards specialists as well. So obviously these standards are going to need to be highly technical and probably encompass a number of different sort of safety technologies. Age assurance is just one of them. And obviously age assurance breaks down into a variety of different sort of biometric technologies and age estimation, age verification. And so I maybe just would build on John, what you were saying about sort of it being sort of government-led, government-driven. I think there might be a variety of different ways that could work itself out. But I agree that we do need common standards and we need to take a user-centered design approach to understanding the user experience and how trust and safety fits into all of that.
Yeah. Then if I may, go ahead.
I just want to chime in. I definitely agree that you need the private sector, you need the safety tech and the specialists to be involved, sort of hand in glove with the government, right? Because that's where the expertise lies. It actually is in the private sector. And I think what I would say is just for government kind of needs to have the regulations that levels the playing field, right? So it's not voluntary. So that child safety isn't just left up to individual companies, but government can sort of say, hey, everybody has to have seatbelts and airbags and anti-lock brakes. You guys design them the best that you can because you're the experts. But at the end of the day, to use that analogy with the auto industry, end of the day, government sort of has to, create the accountability mechanisms across industry. But absolutely, you have to do it with the specialists and the companies themselves who are creating these spaces.
Can I just jump in? Looking at the sort of data privacy and what that means from a metaverse context, I think is a really interesting adjacency and perhaps an area where we've seen a lot of progress over the last year or so. So Public, we've been working over the summer with one of the companies in our accelerator, a company called Privately. They do sort of private on-device age assurance and are sort of one of the leaders in that space. We've been working with them to really understand sort of how the age-appropriate design code in the UK, which is a pioneering piece of guidance, which essentially looks at how a variety of different online services embed age-appropriate design from a data protection point of view into their platforms. Focuses on a few things, but at the core, it's really about understanding sort of the age range of users, which is fundamental to developing age-appropriate design, undertaking a data protection impact assessment, which is sort of a GDPR concept about really understanding the risks in data privacy and specifically sort of special category child data, and then implementing technical and governance changes, which at the core of it are things like sort of choice architecture and default settings, so switching off user profiling and geolocation settings and ensuring that sort of the platform is designed in the best interest of the child. And it's really exciting to see that in the US, the California Age Appropriate Design Code Act has taken some of those best practices from the UK and embedding them in Silicon Valley. I think what we've seen there is that actually this is sort of a complex area of design where sort of data privacy interacts with online safety. And it's also a really interesting precedent of how an approach that is piloted in one geography is then exported as a model to other kind of key areas and geographies. So hopefully that's a model that can follow for other areas of sort of safety by design principles in the metaverse. And that'll be a sort of a big step forward for the sector as that California age appropriate design code matures.
Amazing. Thank you, Ben. And I see Justin. Let's see if we can hear from you, Justin. I would love to go over to you to chime into some of these questions. And we are really talking about what are the potential solutions to privacy, safeguarding the children in the metaverse.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, if you could face.
Hey, that's exciting. Thank you, everyone. Hi, I'm Justin from Consumer Reports, where I head up our work on technology policy. And so I think the most helpful solution from our perspective would be around platform responsibility. That right now platforms don't necessarily legally have an obligation to act to protect users on the platform from abuse. To the contrary, investing in content moderation and policing the platform is expensive. I think we've seen from like Elon Musk recently fired most of the trust and safety team at Twitter. And so Twitter may have fewer resources to respond to abuse on their platform. Similarly, like platforms like, the companies that run them may not be sufficiently motivated to take the steps that are necessary to use reasonable precautions to go after bad behavior. In the United States and a lot of countries around the world, there's legal protection. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act says that the platform isn't legally responsible for what happens on there. I think there are benefits to that protection. It means that companies are not necessarily strictly liable for everything that happens, but I think as a result, companies do underinvest in content moderation and in monitoring abuse. And so seeing some new legal protections saying that companies do have a legal obligation to take steps to remediate harms, I think would be helpful. I know Representative Trahan spoke in this room like an hour or so ago, and she has I think a thoughtful bill that would provide legal requirements for companies to invest in their platforms to, again, not necessarily going to collect to police everything or stop everything, but would incentivize them to take more steps to remediate bad behavior. I'll say on privacy, we have advocated for a comprehensive privacy legislation for years. They should apply to the metaverse just as they should apply everywhere else. I will say I may have some slight differences from folks on this panel around age verification. I think in theory, there's benefits to it. I think in practice, it results in companies having to collect a lot more data about you. So when I go online, if I have to prove my identity to everyone, I think that's the privacy violation that the companies, as a result, have to collect a lot more data about you. I think there are innovations and ways that companies are trying to do it in more privacy-preserving ways. But it is a concern that we have. I think there is value to anonymous speech in the metaverse just as everywhere else. There should be a chance to experiment and be different and be a little bit weird without necessarily having everything tied to your real name. There have been efforts doing age verification going back to the 1990s. This is a debate we had around MySpace in the 2000s, where Attorney General Blumenthal said if we can put a man on the moon, of course we can do age verification. Well, it hasn't proven to be that easy ever since. And so I think, while I think there are certainly some environments where authentication would make sense, I would worry about that as a comprehensive solution to everything. So sorry again for my my delay in being able to participate.
I know you're totally fine. We're so glad to have you. And those are really amazing insights. In fact, it reminds me of a very particular thing that I heard from my former colleague, Alex Stamos. At one of these conferences, he talked about the trade-offs. And when you talk about, hey, we want to be safe in the metaverse, and then the solution is age appropriate or age verification, but the trade-off is privacy. And we trade off our anonymity to remain safe. And those kinds of trade-offs make it so complicated to find that proper solution. And this is another area that I personally would love to see governments kind of stepping in, assuming the role to help define that fine line. Is currently this whole thing is left to the company, and then of course, they're leading to collect more data.
Yeah, one of the areas like age-appropriate design code in California, I think they actually kind of weakened it to say, well, you only have to kind of estimate age. And so I think trying to say, no, you don't need to get everyone's credit card just in order to access an adult-specific website. Or sorry, like an adult-specific environment. The other thing that regulators could do, I mean, one thing the age-appropriate design code does, which I think is thoughtful, and that we're also seeing in the Kids Online Safety Act, which is being considered by Congress right now, is to require companies to, think about the values of kids. Like, it's not just all about, short-term shareholder value. You have an obligation to consider other values when designing products, such as the welfare of kids. I think, saying that that's something that companies must explicitly think about, I think is worthwhile. I think auditing, requiring companies to kind of think like one of their speakers was talking about safety by design, thinking about planning for what ways your systems can be abused at all levels of the product. For certain important products, maybe requiring third-party auditing, I think would be reasonable and make sense. And then I think there also needs to be external testing, like public interest researchers, like Consumer Reports and other folks, need to have the ability to create fake accounts and to kick the tires on the platform, to see what's going on and to research stuff. We've definitely seen some efforts by companies to try to make third-party testing harder to kind of hide some of the, to make their algorithms more indecipherable and harder to see what's going on and to test them for bias or for amplifying hate or for other things. And so there probably are some legal protections that researchers need in order to conduct research on some of these emerging platforms like the metaverse.
Yeah. And, I'm going to actually John in this. John, I know that the topic is the underbelly of the metaverse, and you firsthand dealt with the really horrendous matters that must be addressed, no matter how complicated, in the internet era. So, you want to maybe even share a couple of personal or any stories that could shed light on the impact that it has on the human being, the child behind, or any survivors that you interacted in?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, Kavya. So at International Justice Mission, we've been working in the Philippines, in partnership with the Philippine government, to protect children from live-streamed sexual abuse since about 2016. Some of the earlier cases we worked on were as early as 2011. And to date, we've supported the government in rescuing or safeguarding over 1,000 victims in the Philippines. Many of these people have now become survivors, and they have been they've rehabilitated and have gone on to college, and many of them have actually become survivor leaders and advocates. And they formed what's known as the Philippine Survivor Network. So IJM has supported the Philippine Survivor Network. We've also learned a lot from these survivors about the harm that they experienced. And we actually ask them, what do they think should be done to make the internet and social media platforms and other online spaces safer? Earlier this year, they actually wrote a letter to the UK government, to Parliament, advocating for a strong online safety bill in the UK. And one of the things that the survivors said that is really, I think, powerful to me is they said if platforms can't keep live stream child sexual abuse off of their platform, if video chat, video call companies can't keep that from happening, then they should actually close their platform. Essentially, what they're saying is it's just too dangerous, right? It's like a car that is too dangerous the way it's designed, and then it gets pulled off the market, right? Or a crib that babies are dying in a crib, and what happens? It gets recalled. You can't sell that product anymore because it's not safe. And so I know that for a lot of people that kind of sounds like extreme, like, oh wow, so saying we shouldn't have the metaverse if we can't keep it safe, or you're saying we shouldn't have video call applications if children are being sexually abused, and that abuse is being live streamed around the world. Well, that's what the survivors say, and that I think is something, owing to the harm that they experienced. We at IGM conducted research on online exploitation of children, which we released in 2020, and it showed that the average victim was abused for 2 years before it was discovered, and that some children were abused as long as 4 years before it was identified, because it's hidden in these video calls and these online spaces where it's not being detected, it's not being reported, and the platforms are not doing enough to disrupt or prevent it. There's one survivor in particular who I actually would encourage you to listen to her podcast. She goes by the pseudonym of Ruby, and her podcast is called The Fight of My Life, Finding Ruby, and it's a 6-part true crime series. She's a survivor leader now. She's an adult now. She was trafficked and exploited as a child, but she's telling her story of the harm done to her online, and also not just the harm, but then how she was rescued and safeguarded, and her rehabilitation, and her process of actually becoming a survivor leader and an advocate for change. I would really encourage you to listen to her story and what she has to say, because there are absolutely trade-offs. One of the things that Ruby, she was one of the survivor leaders who wrote this letter to the UK Parliament. She actually advocated for avoiding anonymity. She said, when individuals are anonymous online, when they have fake accounts, so they don't have to use their real name, no real identity, and there's kind of a lack of a sense of accountability. And she said a lot of the people who are exploiting her were using fake online accounts. So nobody knew who it was. It's harder for law enforcement, even if they, want to do an investigation or they submit for process. There's no real name there, right? There's no real identity behind that account. And so I think you have to really think about the trade-offs with anonymity online, and then the ability to protect people from harm, protect children from harm, and then you actually seek justice, right? Like actually have a investigation and a legal process and a prosecution if there's no real identity associated with these accounts. So that's just kind of a story that I would share. The abuse is real. Even if it's going to happen in the metaverse, it's going to be real, right? Like this, it feels very lifelike. And then the trauma will also be real as well. So I think we are, we care about data privacy. We care about user privacy. We want an open and free internet. We have to have these honest conversations about the cost of things like anonymity, or the cost of things like no age verification at all, right? So we have to kind of balance that out.
Absolutely, John. And just quickly, I want to go back to the point that you made about recall. So here at XRSI, we're actually working on version 2.0 of XRSI privacy and safety framework. And as we were doing these community calls, we actually arrived at that point where, in dangerous technology such as autonomous cars, or just car in general, you have the recall set up. But there has never been, we have humans in the loop, society in the loop. This recall aspect has never been considered within the context of regulating or safeguarding humans in technological context. And I really want Justin and Dan, I want your opinion on this. This is something that we're considering at the XRSI privacy and security framework for the immersive technologies. What are your thoughts on this, Dan? And Justin, you as well. Should we be drawing that line and really asking for recall of technologies and potentially banning them when they are causing harm, especially to children?
Yeah, I have thoughts on that. One, I think John is right that if some products, if the costs are just outweigh the benefits to society, we should just say no. This is unsafe at any speed, right? It goes back to Ralph Nader. I think that is like an element of consumer protection law. Like the basic consumer protection law of the United States, says that a business practice is unfair if the cost to consumers outweigh the benefits, and it leads to substantial harm. So the Federal Trade Commission has had this power for the last 30, 40 years. They've done it on they've done some actions like on privacy and some other areas. But they might make the decision that certain product design is so inherently unsafe that it should be prohibited. We have seen also some efforts by some things that the courts have done that said that certain product design is unfair and illegal. So I can't remember if it was Snapchat, but some social media company have a filter that it would show how fast you were going in a vehicle and would give you more and more points based on how fast you were going. And as the predictable result of this was that some kids were taking selfies going 150 miles an hour and bragging to their friends about it. But there was a court case about that called Lemon v. Snap. I guess it was Snap, where the court said that was negligent design. It was kind of obvious from that the cost to kids and the harms from it would outweigh the benefits, and therefore you are liable for that choice. And I mentioned before, Section 230, insulates companies from the design, from the choices that other. But this was decision. They're the ones who rolled out this filter, and the court said this is just too harmful. And so I think there are some legal precedents, some legal authorities we have already. But I also think that new regulation is probably appropriate too. We can use these general purpose tools, but probably I think there's some more targeted areas that would be helpful to give regulators additional tools to go after certain like really harmful behaviors.
And Jen?
I think we have to understand that sort of bad things happen offline in real life, and there are perpetrators for offline, whether it's violence against women and girls, or child sexual exploitation and abuse offline. And unfortunately, this will translate into online and metaversal experience. It's, I guess, an element of the human condition. And so we have to accept that and take a risk-based approach. So to some extent, the idea of just banning a platform or a technology because it has sort of failed it's really sort of binary, and actually sort of what the UK's online safety bill is doing is really sort of introducing a risk assessment for platforms to understand kind of what are the vectors for harm on their platform. For example, sort of what are the kind of communication channels, what are the areas of interactivity, and what does the kind of feature and product design look like, and what does that mean for the safety of users. So I think firstly we need to take a risk-based approach. I think increasing transparency so that those kind of risk assessments are at least in part available to the public and to the regulators, so that we can understand the risks for children and adults on certain platforms. I think it's tricky to take a one-size-fits-all approach, because whether it's sort of a sandbox game like Roblox, it's going to look very different from Horizon Worlds or the Facebook, the old school kind of Facebook app. That each of those user experiences look different, the risk profiles look different, and actually really need to understand kind of end to end, from all the way from kind of access and sign on through to kind of the participation in the service, all the way through to kind of compliance, reporting, and sort of enforcement of trust and safety, sort of taking a holistic approach to it. And one of the key questions is sort of, what do good key performance indicators look like for trust and safety in the metaverse, but in all platforms? And actually, I would suggest that it's not just about sort of the volume of content that's taken down. It's obviously any sort of metric to monitor, but actually looking at the kind of community, sort of community-based metrics, understanding not just kind of the effectiveness of a moderator or moderation team, but actually some broader metrics to really understand kind of whether those platforms are succeeding in making their experience safer for users.
Yeah. One thing that I have to and I agree with you. The binary approach should not be taken. However, I'll bring up, for instance, there are dark patterns, and like the dark patterns are these design choices that are made, which may not have an immediate impact on a child, but over time, it actually determines how much of a privacy loss happens, how much data they disclose, and many other things, which FTC has actually put out specific guidance around the dark patterns. And so I use that as an example for more like a precision, context-based, disarming this harmful behavior coming from various design choices. One of the examples, a very recent one, when Quest Pro was launched, enabling the eye tracking button is already highlighted. And like eye tracking, eye gaze tracking, that is a remarkably impactful technology that gives so much more data to Meta. And so embedding these dark patterns without informing the individual what the potential impact is, it's very wrong. Specifically when FTC has literally laid out the guidance, don't do that, but they're waiting until the harm happens. So going back to what I'm getting to is, how about this metaverse specifically? I think we need to think about prevention of harm more than just, somebody finds an organization, let's say $1 billion, that is not going to bring back Ruby in the form where she was before the harm. And I think that's the underbelly here is metaverse. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Justin, in terms of like this prevention, as well as I want John to jump in to talk about the impact on.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm definitely sympathetic in principle to what Dan's saying, that yes, the platforms are all different. There's need for flexibility. One size cannot fit all. But on the other side, like, think about how understaffed regulators are. They don't have the ability to police like 8 million different kinds of dark patterns out there. And the company, and again, like any given company can just do, constant A/B testing with all the data they have to see, what's going to put their thumb on the scale and get folks to agree to something that they didn't necessarily understand they could go after. And again, think about like the Federal Trade Commission or state attorneys general or the ICO in the United Kingdom just don't have the ability to police all that. And so I think while in principle, yes, flexibility makes sense, I think ultimately the law is going to need to be a little bit more prescriptive and just say, here's how you have to present this option to folks. Like something can't be pre-checked. The option for the more privacy invasive things shouldn't be much bigger. It shouldn't, all friend requests shouldn't be automatically done. There is a cost to innovation from doing that, but at the same side, again, asking regulators to consider every single interface one by one is unworkable. I think there's an analogy to competition law in the United States. There's this idea of the rule of reason. If this merger meets the rule of reason, then it's okay. But that means that any particular anti-competitive practice has to be litigated for 10 years with armies of economists and lawyers and experts on both sides trying to prove what is reasonable and not. And as a result, the regulators have to spend 5 years proving that water is wet. And then meanwhile, the industry has moved on. And so ultimately, I think there need to be brighter lines and clearer rules for the road, even if that does to have some understandable on innovation. But I think some innovation is bad. And I think the regulators are going to have to go after it.
Yeah, and we have 5 minutes, John, quickly, if you want to comment on that point.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, it's all about priorities as a society. And so it really comes down to what do we tolerate? And right now, society tolerates child sexual abuse online. That's just the reality, right? You have all the data out there, close to 29 million reports to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children last year. In 2021, 85 million images, videos, and other files related to child sexual exploitation reported in 1 year. And so, right now we tolerate that, right? And so I think government needs to say, no, we don't tolerate that anymore. We don't tolerate it happening on social media, in video chat apps. We're not going to tolerate it in the metaverse. And so the details, the specifics of how that happens, can somehow be left, I think, to each company, because it does have to be tailor fit to their platform and to the risks of harm. But I think the standards need to be set by the government. For example, if you have a video call application, you have to have rules and tools and technology in place meant to prevent and disrupt streaming of child sexual abuse in your video call. If you don't, then you can't have your video call platform. It doesn't mean that a child's never going to be abused, but it means you have to have certain systems and processes and technology in place meant to mitigate and prevent that harm. And if you don't get to play in the game. I think because that's if we prioritize child safety. Right now, what we prioritize as a society is like absolute innovation online, right? We prioritize absolute connectivity and speed. And so anybody can make a video call with anyone at any time, and we don't have any expectation of safety there. So really it comes down to what do we prioritize as a society?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I also want to read a message from YouTube from Karina Caroz. Internet is like street vigilance, monitoring, reporting, policing, part of it, and talks about, of course, the next iteration of the internet. We have about 3 minutes. The hand raise is open if there is certainly time for one quick question. I would agree with John, is ultimately it comes down to all of us, what kind of society, what kind of metaverse do we want to create, what kind of a extended reality we want to live in. And those are the choices that matter. It can be pro-innovation, but it doesn't have to be at the cost of harming children. There's some red line that must be drawn, and that's not something that we should allow platforms to do. We should give them strict guidance and then have them contextualize however they want to implement in their tool. But something there is definitely, like about the panel, we talk about the underbelly of the metaverse. Any last thoughts, Jan, before we close? We don't have any questions. However, Dan, any last thoughts as we at these final moments? We've got a couple of minutes. What are your last thoughts? Dan?
Final thoughts? I don't know.
Final thoughts. Yes.
Go first.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
You've got 1 minute.
Thank you, Kavya, for this. I think it's been a really good dialogue, and really appreciate the audience for their time and attention. I think my final thought is really just that we have to continue to have these conversations, and I think we should include survivors of different types of online harm and abuse in these conversations. We can hear directly from them and their expertise and experiences. Thank you so much on behalf of IJ.
Thank you, John. And Justin, any final thoughts as we have less than a minute left?
Yeah, just I think that we can't wait, right? I mean, think about like other things online, like the web. Like we let it, in the 1990s, the approach was like let it happen. It's gonna be fine. Social media emerged in the 2000s, and there's a hands-off approach. And then over time, we kind of realized, oh, this is actually not perfect, and we're trying to retrofit some protections on, like private, like platform accountability. I think we need to be not just to say, oh, the metaverse, who knows? Let's just let it happen. But we need to be thoughtful and willing to make interventions right now, so that we're not stuck in 10 years, trying to address some of the problems that maybe we could have headed off in the first place. Again, learning from some experience with other online environments.
Thank you so much. Thank you, gentlemen. It's been an honor to share the stage with you. Here, you're multidisciplinary, very profound insights that is going to help me with, XRSI research and further our work, and even other people who are listening in. I'm sure you benefited from some of these insights. Please stick around. We will return back. I believe we are going to program. Laura, you are up next and in the stage. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having us.
Thank you all.